Funding for this edition of One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been provided by PSE&G, committed to providing safe, reliable energy now and in the future. RWJ Barnabas Health. Bank of America. NJM Insurance Group, serving New Jersey's drivers, homeowners, and business owners for more than 100 years. The New Jersey Education Association. The New Jersey Board of Public Utilities Clean Energy Program. Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey. Here when you need us most, now and always. The New Jersey Economic Development Authority. And by the Fidelco Group. Promotional support provided by CIANJ and Commerce Magazine. And by AM 970 The Answer.
This is One-on-One. I'm an equal American just like you are.
The jobs of tomorrow are not the jobs of yesterday.
Look at this. You got this?
Here it is, man. Look at that.
Life without dance is boring.
I don't care how good you are or how good you think you are, there is always something to learn.
Do you enjoy talking politics?
No. People call me because they feel nobody's paying attention.
Our culture, I don't think, has ever been tested the way it's being tested right now.
That's a good question. High five.
Hi, I'm Steve Adubato. Welcome to another compelling program where we kick off with our good friend Bob Mann, professor and chair of the Communications and Media Studies Initiative at Caldwell University. Bob, good to see you, my friend.
Great to see you again, Steve. Last time we were teaching a course together. It was great.
Yeah, let's put that out there. Bob and I co-taught a doctoral program course for educational administrators about leadership and crisis communication. Great initiative. But today we're talking about podcasting. There's a new initiative at Caldwell University that teaches podcasting. Bob, talk about it.
Yeah, Steve, we really thought that podcasting was something that we could bring to the outside community in addition to our undergraduates. And we already had a radio broadcasting course. I had developed a podcasting course. It generated so much interest among the undergrads, we thought that people in the outside community could benefit as well. So it's a 4-course podcast certificate program, and people can complete it in 1 year, and they learn public speaking, radio broadcasting, but of course, focus heavily on podcasting.
Bob, it's interesting. You've been doing podcasts for a long time, and actually plug your podcast right now. It's called Hot Media with Bob Mann, and people can find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, right?
That is correct, Steve. Hot Media with Bob Mann. We talk about the hottest controversies in mass media and also the hottest new content in mass media. And I have a wide variety of guests. I had a political science professor on the other day talking about politicians in trouble and how they manipulate the media. And this week, I'm interviewing a guy who's producing a totally online situation comedy. So we run the full spectrum of media.
But here's what's interesting, and I've been on your show before, you've been with us, we've taught together, and you've been in the communication and media business for more than a couple of years. My question is this: what's the difference between podcasting and doing a broadcast, a radio show, a television show that looks like radio? What's the difference between that and podcasting?
So many people ask that question because they say, well, isn't it just a radio show? It kind of is. And broadcasting is radio communication intended for the general public, AM and FM, whereas podcasting is a digital audio file of a radio style broadcast for a very specific targeted audience. Now, people like Joe Rogan, they're getting millions of listeners, but a lot of people, maybe with a business or some specific interest, they are very narrowcast, and people download it and listen to it whenever they want. You're also your own employer as a podcaster, but you don't have the infrastructure of the radio station to back you up and publicize you. So those are two of the key differences. The main one being broadcast radio over the air, AM and FM, podcasting over the internet for places like Spotify.
But Bob, obviously media broadcasting is evolving every day. It's evolved dramatically in the last 5 to 10 years. But the business part of podcasting, it's always fascinated me. We have our own podcast. People can check them out. But I'm not even saying making money, just basically paying for itself as opposed to doing it as a vanity project. That concerns me. To what degree do you help students understand the business of podcasting?
Well, the title is called Production, Performance, and Purpose. They have to decide what the purpose is of what they're doing. And very often you can be operating something in tandem with something else you're doing, and it doesn't have to make a profit on its own. But a lot of these platforms for podcasting, they want you to have up to 20,000 unique downloads before they'll even consider advertising, and you can monetize it. It's not that easy to monetize, but it is something you can use for a lot of other purposes. And just like Think Tank is part of your entire media arsenal, Hot Media is something I use at Caldwell University, as well as something I am building toward, hopefully, monetizing. But it's a challenge. There's over 2 million podcasts out there. Yeah.
5 years ago, how many do you think there were? Meaning, how much expansion has there been? To what degree has it exploded?
It's exploded over the past 5 years. That's why I actually used my sabbatical to learn everything about it. I felt I had to make a transition from broadcasting over to podcasting for my outside career, and it really has gone up tremendously. Supposedly, overall, there are 48 million episodes out there. A lot of these, though, are not active podcasts. They're called pod faders. They start, they find out it's too much work, they drift away. You have to know why you want to do it.
You know, I'm curious about this, but and again, to disclose, Bob and I have had conversations about media and what makes for a great interview, what makes for great broadcasting. There are a lot of folks who think, this goes all the way back, I'm going to date myself, to Johnny Carson. People say, well, that looks really easy. What he does is easy. And I've often argued that people who are interviewers, people who broadcast and engage people, when it looks easy, that's when you know that person's really good. And it's not that easy, because I've seen, without getting on a soapbox, really big name people convinced they could do a podcast, they can do. I've seen housewives of whatever place they're from. I'm going to do a podcast. And they think it's all about them as opposed to something different. What am I getting wrong here, Bob?
You are 100% spot on, Steve. I once had a friend insult me so much, almost ended the friendship. Oh, well, anybody can do a talk show. Really? It's not just a list of Q&As. It is not just having a conversation, you know, with someone else among a couple of people, because it has to be a conversation that's important and interesting to other people. And people just don't get that. Some people go into it and you would think they're doing a job interview. So where'd you go to high school? You know, what's your age?
They're going through their list.
Yeah, they're just going through the list like they're interviewing them instead of trying to find out what they're talking about, something that only that one person has the authority to deliver and answer on, some story that you've researched. You don't want to be overcooked, but at the same, you know, keep your curiosity fresh. But at the same time, they go into it totally blind, and it's a disaster. It's actually a very hard job, and everybody says it's just talking.
And by the way, everything Bob Mann just said goes for a really good podcast. If it's just for you because you're interested, why do it? Right. It's got to be for others and for yourself and bring value. That's Bob Mann, professor and chair of communication and media studies at Caldwell University. They, in fact, are one of the higher ed partners that we have, and I'm proud to have taught and continue to be teaching at Caldwell University. Hey, Bob, thanks for joining us, my friend.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Steve.
You got it. I'm Steve Adubato. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
To watch more One-on-One with Steve Adubato, find us online and follow us on social media.
We're now joined by Christian Fuscarino, Executive Director, Garden State Equality. Christian, good to see you.
Nice seeing you again. Thank you for having me on.
And we'll be back in the studio, I promise, at some point. But Christian, let me ask you this. The LGBTQ plus community, disproportionately affected, impacted by COVID as we tape in the middle of May?
Yes, the LGBTQ community has been hit hard by COVID, both from a mental health perspective and from a health disparities perspective. Any community that has health disparities had a harder year this past year than the general population. And that's saying a lot because everybody had a very difficult year. But for those who have a less likely chance to have a primary care physician, this was a very difficult year. And we know from studies that came out of California that LGBTQ people non-white LGBTQ people were twice as likely to test positive for COVID.
By the way, as we put up your website, I did not give you a chance to describe what Garden State Equality is. Tell everyone.
Sure. Garden State Equality is New Jersey's largest LGBTQ organization. We serve the community in all 21 counties. We're in high schools, middle schools, hospital systems, workplaces, ensuring that there's lived equality, because we've done a great job getting equality in the law, but there's still so much to do so that people can experience that equality in their everyday lives.
You know, the term social determinants of health is used a lot. We have healthcare leaders, hospital executives who talk about it a lot. What does it mean to you, and how does it relate to the constituency you're most concerned about?
Well, for the LGBTQ community, there are a lot of specific health services that are needed. And for a long time, people needed to travel into New York City or Philadelphia out of New Jersey just to find those basic care and resources. Thanks to the folks at RWJ Barnabas, there's been a lot of strides in the state to make sure that we offer these services within our state's borders so that people don't need to travel outside. And that's been wonderful. So in Somerset, they've opened up the first full service LGBTQ health clinic. In Asbury Park, we now have an FQHC that serves the LGBTQ community. And those service providers are growing so that way, you know, regardless of what county you live in, you can drive within 30 minutes and find some basic care and resources that are important to you.
Okay. Talk about different ways that people are affected. Christian, by the way, you mentioned RWJ Barnabas Health, a significant supporter of public broadcasting, to disclose that. Christian, this is an interesting question on homelessness. How does homelessness play into the LGBTQ community and COVID?
40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ. That's a
Wait, 40%?
40% of homeless youth identify as LGBTQ. That's, you know, any given year. It's the highest rate of youth is from the LGBTQ community. Unfortunately, this last year, young people who are from homes that are not supportive and loving saw themselves homeless. It's devastating to see this happen. And the problem is because for a lot of young people, they go to school, and school can be their safe place. You know, LGBTQ youth face, unfortunately, some of the highest rates of bullying in school. But for those who are coming from homes that are not loving and supportive, school is that way out. And with COVID and everybody quarantining together, we got to know each other a lot more this year. And unfortunately, parents who decide that they won't love their child simply because of who their child loves, they saw those youth out on the streets.
Are we still there, Christian, in the place you just described?
Yeah, I think it's easy here in New Jersey, right? This is like a bubble where we have some of the best LGBTQ equality in the nation. But these instances of inequality and hatred still exist in our state, unfortunately. We also had the unfortunate reminder with the Trump administration, where it was just setback after setback for the LGBTQ community. All the progress that we made under the Obama years, a lot of that was pushed back. And now, fortunately, with President Biden, we're seeing some of those issues of equality put back into place. We're moving forward, and hopefully for transgender individuals who have never really experienced equality, even under the Obama years, we're making a lot of progress for that part of our community as well.
You know, it's interesting with Pete Buttigieg heading up the Department of, as the Secretary of Transportation, if I'm not mistaken. There's also a significant appointment in state government in New Jersey as it relates to representation of the LGBTQ community, particularly at the Department of Environmental Protection. Sean is someone we know very well. Tell everyone who he is and why he matters so much.
Yeah, we're so fortunate to have Sean Latourette lead our DEP, the first openly gay person in the entire nation to lead an environmental protection agency. It's a big deal. Here in New Jersey, a state with no LGBTQ representation in the legislature, it's more important than ever that we have representation. And thankfully, Governor Murphy has ensured that his cabinet is representative of the diversity of New Jersey. We know that Sean joined Commissioner Sue Fulton, who leads the MVC, as the second LGBTQ member of his cabinet.
Before we let you go, tell folks why that matters. Why that matters, that people who represent different communities serve in prominent positions in government?
In a lot of ways, LGBTQ people are invisible, right? We know that from a data standpoint, where we saw under the Trump administration not including LGBTQ people in the most recent census. We were supposed to be included. Now it's going to be another 10 years before that population is counted. Mm-hmm. We know from LGBTQ inclusive curriculum in schools that when LGBTQ youth don't see themselves represented in the lessons that they learn, there's higher rates of bullying. But when you teach those lessons, that way young people can see themselves reflected in the people that they look up to.
You know, before I let you go, Christian, I normally don't do this, but I'm going to just share this to put things in perspective. Back in another lifetime, before you were even born, I think, in 1985, in the state legislature, when I was there for a short period of time, together with a group of other legislators, we sponsored what was called then the Gay Rights Bill, which was simply anti-discrimination. You could not discriminate against people based on their sexual orientation for housing and employment. It took 7 years. And those of us who were involved in that initiative were accused of pretty horrific things. But 7 years later, that bill became law. The reason I mention it is, while we still have serious problems and challenges, we've made real progress.
We have made tremendous progress, and it's in large thanks to those who have paved the way. So thank you for your advocacy there. Unfortunately, we still
shouldn't have been so difficult, but go ahead.
We still have nearly 30 states in the nation where LGBTQ people aren't protected and can be fired simply because of who they love or how they identify. And so that's why it's so important to pass the Equality Act. We have a lot of national and global companies headquartered here in New Jersey, and their employees here might be safeguarded and protected, and yet in other states they're not.
Yeah, we think we've made progress. We still have such a long way to go. Christian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. Be well.
You got it. I'm Steve Adubato. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
To watch more One-on-One with Steve Adubato, find us online and follow us on social media.
We're pleased to be joined once again by Kevin O'Toole, Chairman of the Board of Commissioners, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, and also a former state senator in New Jersey. Good to see you, Kevin.
Good seeing you, Steve. How are we doing?
We're doing great. Listen, beyond talking policy about transportation and other issues with the Port Authority, the focus of this segment is on a column you wrote for NJ.com. It's time to deliver on the promise of America that talked about discrimination against Asian Americans that you know very well. By the way, by way of background, tell folks about your mom and your dad and your background.
Sure. My mom was born in North Korea and she was forced to flee back in the 50s. She lost a couple of brothers in the conflict. The North Korean soldiers had done some terrible things, so they left. She went over to the South Korean border after a couple of months of flight. She worked for the South Korean government, washing clothes and other manual labor things. And she met my dad, an American GI, and they had a relationship. He reenlisted, came back to South Korea, and brought her over to the States in 1957.
So as it relates to discrimination against the Asian American community, this matters on a personal as well as a policy and a societal level to you. You've experienced it very directly. More specifically, 2007 in a Senate race, you said in this article the race card was played against you. Talk about it.
Yeah, it was one of those, the opponent we were running against, he, among other things, he was making the comment that I didn't reflect the population because, I was, whether it was Chinese or Korean, they weren't really sure what it was at the time. They had, I guess, contemplated actually, in his words, the campaign manager, jaunticing my face just a little more to give the full context. They figured if they could just race bait it and show everybody that I was not really, an Irish or Italian or more Americanized, perhaps I could lose some of my footing in the race. And that's happened before. And listen, politics is, it's a tough sport. It's, you get punched in the face every once in a while. But that was, full blown, this was in your face. He is not an American. He happens to be Korean or Chinese or whatever it is. And they thought that I would lose support because of that, which didn't happen. We ended up winning rather handily.
But Kevin, your voice matters a lot. And this is why under this category of New Jersey leaders who matter, we're having this discussion with you. But it also matters because you've talked in this piece that you wrote for NJ.com about COVID and its impact exacerbating, if you will, accelerating and making worse discrimination against Asian Americans.
So over the COVID year, from what I'm told, actually hate crimes have gone down 6%, but hate crimes against Asians has increased over 150, 160%. Isn't that, it's astonishing. Places in the cities, New York City in particular, up 223%. In New Jersey, it ranks like 7th or 8th in terms of hate crimes against Asians in the last year. You go to Vancouver, it's up 717%. And even though the Asian population in Vancouver is over 40%, it's just astonishing that we've seen in the United States over 6,000 hate crimes against Asians in the last year. And it doesn't seem like it's slowing down, it's only getting worse.
What do we need to do, Kevin?
Well, I mean, first of all, you need to speak out, and having this conversation is very helpful. I felt compelled to write something about it. And you need other officials to start talking about this is a hate crime. We're going to recognize it. You have to have support groups for the folks who are going through this. Look, typically, growing up in a Korean household, the Asian Americans who were just brought over here, they don't want to complain. They don't want to go to the police. They don't want to. And this is largely an underreported crime because Asians, my experience, Steve, is that they will not go to the police and they kind of live with it, whether it's a harassment, whether it's an assault, whether it's a break-in into a business. They have kind of just tolerated. But it seems this year, now, I think with some of the education, Steve, you're seeing some of the Asian victims are now speaking out. You're seeing some bystanders who are now trying to stop some of it. I think that's part of the education. Bystanders, if they're seeing, like in San Francisco, 2 grandmothers were knifed sitting out waiting for a bus. It's just astonishing. And now bystanders tried to help and stop. But you're seeing some folks who are trying to be proactive about it. Training in the workforce, training in our societies, training in our schools, education, what we should do, what we shouldn't do. And frankly, look, it got to the tipping point, whether last year with Floyd and this year with the Asian hate. Our society is just so filled with hate and it's frustration. I think COVID kind of brings us to a boiling point, and it's got to escape somewhere, Steve. And it seems like the easy target the last year has been the Asian American community.
But the other thing, Kevin, the title of this, and I don't know whether you or the folks at NJ.com figured out the headline, but it's time to deliver on the promise of America. And it starts out, let's just listen to this. I'm not going to read the whole thing, just this section. When my children were born a generation ago, I envisioned they would grow up in a better world than I had. It is a universal hope of parents that the societal failures of the past be corrected before their children experience discrimination, potentially hate-filled violence. Sadly, my children have not inherited such a world. This is personal.
Yeah, so listen, when we moved into the house my parents live in now, literally 3 of the relatives, they put up for sale signs, literally right around our house. And they said, we're moving out. And yeah, they did. 30 years later, they moved out. Once we got to know them, we looked different. The kids were, crazy, whatever, half Asian, half Irish. And there wasn't really much of a tolerance. My daughter, fast forward, when she was 5, she came home very angry with her parents. And she folds her arms and she goes, I'm really mad at you, Mom and Dad. She goes, you never told me I was Chinese. I said, well, you're not Chinese, right? I said, you're Korean, you're French, you're Polish, you're Irish. She goes, well, one of the classmates told me, she called me a chink and says, I'm Chinese. I said, well, you're not Chinese, so get over it. But you saw some of that, percolate. This is in kindergarten. So listen, the reality
5
is—
5 years old, 6 years old, Kevin.
5. Listen, so you have to grow a thick skin in some respects, but you have to have this understanding that we need to speak out. We need to have a tolerance. We need to talk to the folks. If there is a problem, if you recognize a hate problem, speak out about it. Don't just go into your shell and just retreat. And if you see it in a place of employment, report it. If you see someone being victimized physically, you have to kind of intercede without hurting yourself. You got to do something about it. We as a nation, society, Steve, we can't tolerate racism anymore. It's chewed us up as a society for the last 40 years.
In a couple of minutes that we have left, also at the Port Authority, there have been incidents involving your employees who happen to be Asian American, correct?
Listen, on the premises, they were leaving work or coming to work, and a couple of the employees, Asian Americans, were assaulted. And listen, we have the police force has done a great job. We're now monitoring those folks. We're doing a buddy system where we have to, and and those people who are responsible, Steve, we are holding them to the highest order, whether we're prosecuting them to the fullest and holding them responsible. It's something we're very vigilant about, very conscious about. Like I said, in New York City, there's been a surge of 223% increase in hate crimes against Asians in the last year. It's just, those numbers are astonishing.
Let me ask you this. I'm curious. You understand politics more than most. You understand government and people, right? You've had to interact and navigate all kinds of difficult situations. People watching this right now, Kevin, who happen not to be Asian American, or just let's just say that they come from other places and different experiences. To what degree do you genuinely believe that people who are not experiencing something personally, directly themselves, their family members, their children, that they have the capacity to actually care deeply about others who are suffering? As long as my life's good. You get where I'm coming from?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a segment of the population that will just be worried about their own business. But Steve, I really think most people, they're good. I think most people in their heart really have this well of compassion, and they want to have, what's good for the human, their fellow human being. But some of them just aren't aware because they haven't seen it. Now you're seeing the press and media, social media is now playing this out. I think some of the folks in our community just didn't realize how prolific and prominent and how damaging this hate, this beatdown, this harassment against Asian Americans. It's now people are talking about it. There's support groups, there's counseling groups, there's people who are saying, we're not going to tolerate it. There's websites, there's leaders of our community, elected officials are standing up and saying, this can't be done. We can't condone this activity anymore. So you're seeing some of those people take note of it, and you're seeing the support groups that are out there, which I think is really necessary. But I think most people really care, and they wouldn't tolerate it. Thank you, Steve. Appreciate the conversation.
One-on-One with Steve Adubato has been a production of the Caucus Educational Corporation. Funding has been provided by PSE&G, RWJ Barnabas Health, Bank of America, NJM Insurance Group, the New Jersey Education Association, the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities Clean Energy Program, Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey, the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, and by the Fidelco Group. Promotional support provided by CIANJ and Commerce Magazine, and by AM 970 The Answer.
It's time to save, New Jersey. New Jersey's Clean Energy Program is your guide to rebates and incentives that can save hundreds, even thousands of dollars for businesses and residents throughout the state by making smarter energy choices. Start today with an energy assessment. We're lighting the way to a clean energy future. Join in at njcleanenergy.com or call 866-NJ-SMART.